Hey again, everyone. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV. We are the voice of college football. We are striking up a live stream here at noon Eastern time on a Saturday. We are just 12 days away from college football and that big Thursday night. Or if you're into the group of five, as I like to be, but have to because of time limitations, focus on the Power Five, but love the group of five and love the American Conference, the Mountain West, the MAC, Sun Belt, and Conference USA, then your football season is only 1 week away. All right, we are in the midst, as you know, of our series predicting the entire Power Five, predicting all the teams, all the standings, and leading us to a college football playoff prediction. I have a ton of work to do. Because of my scheduling series and ranking all the schedules, 70 all the way up to number 1, that brought me to just a few days ago, 68 teams in the Power Five, plus the 4 major independents. I've knocked out the Pac-12. I just released a USC late last night. Please check out that video and my prediction. And with all the videos, certainly give your analysis, but especially would love to see your prediction for not just the final record, but of course, what's most important is that conference record toward a conference championship. So give me your final record for each team. Go through the videos and let me know what you think of each team in the Pac-12 thus far. I just knocked out Kansas. I will be posting that soon. But what I wanted to do for a couple different reasons was take a look at my final results, my final summary and predictions for the Pac-12. Worst conference in college football? Most likely. It was in 2017. It looks to be again in 2018. But remember, things change quickly in college football. Just a couple of years ago, we thought the Big 12 was the absolute worst. The Pac-12 was vying for the best, and that's difficult to believe. But in 2014, the Pac-12 played as good a football top to bottom than anybody in the country. That's what the results tell us. Just a couple of years before that, when Florida State was lambasting the ACC, well, the ACC was the worst conference. How could Duke possibly make it to an ACC championship game? So things change. Although in the SEC, they always have a claim to be the best conference, and that hasn't changed either. So we're knocking out our predictions. We are posting videos every few hours to get you set for 2018. Tomorrow, David Waters, Gators Breakdown, joins us at 5 o'clock Eastern time to talk Florida football. We've got a number of camp reports, team updates coming throughout the week as well. But this is the primary focus, the previews and the predictions. So I will check my phone for the live chat and get your take on anything in college football, but specifically focusing on the Pac-12. Please, of course, join our mailing list. Just send your name and your email, which I will automatically have, to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Just send me your name, your email address, and I'll put you on the mailing list that is growing by the day, by the hour. So I appreciate your feedback and your response to the mailing list. And what that's going to be is every Monday, starting with week 1 of the college football season. So the following Monday after Labor Day, or that will be Labor Day, you will get a mailing, 1 per week. I'm not going to sabotage and bombard your email. We all have junk mail we don't want. I'm going to send you 1 mailing per week that's going to give you a channel update, but more importantly, my take and perspective on the college football weekend. And for you nerds and junkies that love your stats and trends and facts, it will be loaded up with stats, trends, and facts from the weekend of college football. All right, now to the Pac-12. Let's get to it. Not quite straight. Doesn't look great, but... And if this falls, then we will have possibly a blooper, which will be good. It'll go viral, and then I can get 1 million views. But for right now, I don't know if you guys can see this. Maybe I need to move everything in, and this will be a blooper because I'll just have to tear up all the lighting and everything and bring it closer. But I didn't check this out beforehand. But we will get to that in just a second. So if you guys have been watching the videos, you're going to catch me on something, and I apologize because I started producing the videos before I was fully sold on my Pac-12 South division. So I started to go through the North, and I went bottom to top, and I was still weighing Utah, USC. I was looking at records and schedules, and then factoring in, to a lesser extent, some of the bottom teams factored into that, Arizona State and Colorado, in terms of their impact on some of the middle teams and so forth and so on. And as you know, if you do predictions, the records have to add up to a 500 record. Otherwise, it's impossible for your prediction to come true, because regardless of how good the conference is, the conference finishes 500. Go to the SEC, the Big Ten, go to my daughter's softball league back when she played, and all the records have to add up to 500 because they all play each other. And so every game, there's a winner and a loser. So in the Pac-12, I got to a point where I was getting up into this range, and I was still conjecturing and had an internal debate between Utah and USC. And what ended up happening is my numbers were skewed after I completed the Utah video. So this is a bit of a correction here. So my apologies. When I get the staff for 10 or 12, yeah, we'll probably have to get to at least 10 for me to have a specific fact checker. So the other thing that we have in the videos, and I will get to the live chat in just a minute after I explain my standings here. The other thing in the videos that you need to understand is I take great pride in having logical analysis, common sense, and being very up to date on my facts, my stats, and bringing knowledge and insight. We believe that we bring college football analysis to a new level here online. I see a lot of predictions out there that there's nothing wrong with this, but they don't really talk about specific personnel. They just kind of say USC's really good. They're breaking in a new quarterback. They're going to have some struggles, but they've got the best talent, and boom, boom, boom. They're going to win these games and lose these games, and these games are on the border, and then they give you their prediction. I love the personnel breakdown. So I'm talking about 15 to 20 players per team. So there's been a few slip-ups here and there because guys are transferring, and they're transferring throughout the summer. And so I've been tripped up one time that I know of, and I made that correction. So there may be a couple of times based on me researching various sources online. I'm not going to fact check every player that I talk about because, again, I'm mentioning 15 to 20 players per team. So I'm not going to fact check every player to make sure that he's still on campus with that team. There was a particular conversation that I had about Nebraska football, and I mentioned one of the quarterbacks. I'm trying to think who that was off the top of my head. But I had already had a conversation with my Nebraska insider, Parker Gabriel, just 3 days or 4 days earlier than the video that I posted. And one of the quarterbacks between 3 days earlier and that particular video announced his transfer. So I missed that. And so I mentioned him being in the quarterback battle, which he was just a few days earlier. And some guy went nuts on me. Okay, I don't have a large staff to fact check every name and catch every transfer. If you watch the videos and if you watch the channel, I think you'll understand that I come at it in a very knowledgeable and insightful way. And the bloggers, broadcasters, and writers that I bring on know what they're talking about as well. That doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. All right. And I made a mistake here in adding the wins and losses. And again, I didn't make a mistake. I just got to a point where I was cranking out the videos because I know that as we stand right now, we're 12 days away from the first game, Northwestern, Purdue, and the other games that we have on that Thursday night. And I've only knocked out the Pac-12, so that's only 12 teams. I've got 56 to go in 12 days. Yikes. But I'm done with the Pac-12, and here are the revised standings. There's only one change to even out the wins and losses in conference play. You guys, I will let you guys let me know if this can be seen. I'm thinking it can't, so I'm probably going to have to correct this and bring everything a little bit closer. But I'm going to go to the live chat here and explain the standings, explain some of the things that I was looking at and that I had to review that really made this difficult. All right, here we go. Cash Boy D's on the line at 11:40. At 11:40 for the noon event. Cash Boy D. All right, Buckeye State Sports, 9 a.m. Pac-12 time. I understand that. You know, this was a bit of a difficulty. I didn't miss on that, Buckeye State Sports. What my thought was is I didn't want to crank out like 3 or 4 Big 12 videos and then do my Pac-12 wrap-up because that would confuse some people. So I wanted this to post right after I finished with my Pac-12 videos, and I just released Utah and USC late last night, so I wanted to start bright and early West Coast time with the Pac-12 wrap-up before I posted the Big 12. Thought that would be confusing. Also understood that I would have less people watching because it is so early on the West Coast. I'm not up at 9 o'clock in the morning on my day off most of the time either because I'm up so late. Clemson alum 98, Pac-12 title game, Arizona versus Washington. Washington wins. Top 3 teams are all in the North. Okay, we got Navy Thomas on. Question of the day. LSU's quarterback from the 1971-72 season, Burt Jones. Where did he play in the NFL? Come on, Navy Thomas. Who do you think you're talking to here? Maybe this is a good question for the chat. Me not knowing Burt Jones, where he played, Baltimore Colts. Had an excellent NFL career, but he got injured. He had about 5 really good seasons. Then the injury plague kicked in. He led the Colts to the playoffs a couple times, was the quarterback in the famous goes to the post play, Dave Casper to the corner of the end zone in overtime in an NFL playoff game, which rarely happened back in those days. Raiders beat the Colts 37-31. You can fact check me on that one, 37-31, 1976. 1977 NFL playoffs. Then the Raiders lost to the Broncos the next week in the AFC Championship game in Denver as defending Super Bowl champions. Hopefully that's enough of the history on Burt Jones. I could go on. All right, yes, Navy Thomas 8, Baltimore Colts. Savage Dogs. All right. Then, yes, he went to the Rams. The Rams were collecting, and I know I digress here, and we'll get to the Pac-12 standings, but you guys got me started on the NFL, and I rarely talk about the NFL or get to talk about the NFL, but I love NFL history. I know more about NFL history than probably even college football history. But, yeah, the Rams at that point were collecting quarterbacks. They had just gone to the Super Bowl against the Steelers, 1980, and they were just Georgia Frontiere, their owner at the time, whose husband had passed away, Al Rosen. He passed away. She took over the team and went in a buying spree of quarterbacks. So they brought in Steve Bartkowski, Burt Jones, Dan Pastorini, Dieter Brock, of course, who then gained the starting job. This was post Vince Ferragamo. And, well, it was right around the time Vince Ferragamo had led the team to the Super Bowl and taking over for an injured Pat Hayden, USC quarterback, announcer, USC athletic director. Vince Ferragamo led the Rams to the Super Bowl in a near huge upset of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1980, held on to the job for a couple of years. They collected all these veteran quarterbacks, as I mentioned, Dan Pastorini, Steve Bartkowski, Burt Jones, and then they got Dieter Brock from Canada. He was a big CFL star, and Dieter Brock led the Rams to the NFC Championship game against the vaunted 46 Bears defense in 1985. They were shut out, and that was near the end of Dieter Brock's run in Los Angeles, and then they drafted Jim Everett from Purdue. All right, that's enough on the LA Rams. I could go on forever. Leon Hurricanes, what's up, my people? Good to see you, Leon. All right. Navy Thomas says it doesn't look too bad as long as you guys can see it, but I'm doubting you can, but I don't have my contacts in, so I certainly can't read it off the screen. You hammer the usual reflection of the whiteboard. So we do have a reflection over here, but I'm not too concerned about that. If you guys could only see where I'm positioned. It's halfway between the living room and the kitchen, which I've redone the floor. Redone the floor. So hopefully the floor looks good. Did some painting in here last weekend, the weekend before, throughout the week, and redid the floor. Thanks to my daughter and sister helping me. So anyway, I'm halfway between the living room and the kitchen, and this was the best place to post this, where I could pin the tripod up against the wall so it hopefully doesn't fall. All right, then I got lights, stand-up lights here. I've got the fan and the light from both the kitchen and the living room to help us out a little bit here. But I've got paint paraphernalia all over the place, and when I get this place cleaned up, maybe I'll give you guys a tour of the various Mark Rogers TV sets, or lack of sets. All right, so I show 54-54 in league. Did I add wrong? You did not add wrong, Clemson Alum 98. Thanks for checking me. But I didn't add wrong. I never added wrong. I boxed myself into an issue here once I got about right there. And I boxed myself into a problem where the numbers wouldn't line up based on what I wanted to predict. And I'll explain specifically everything, but especially my Utah USC thinking in just a second. So Clemson Alum 98, thanks for fact checking me on 54 and 54 in the league. Jamie, you dump Utah, Arizona overrated. Stanford should win the Pac-12 this year. USC will start slow because the quarterback finished strong. Oregon can win the conference if no injuries at D-line, D-back, and a couple wide receivers step up. So Jamie, you should be proud of my Oregon video, because I basically lined up the same scenario, and especially on the Oregon defensive side of the ball, where they have some studs led by, of course, Jalen Jelks and Troy Dye. Great players, explosive players, disruptors defensively, and they've recruited very well in the secondary to be a very strong defense, but they're very thin. That's the one deep. The two deep, not so good. So depth issues on the Oregon defense. And yes, at wide receiver, not a whole lot coming back. They need guys that we're not real familiar with right now to make big plays. And of course, Justin Herbert has to stay healthy for them to win the Pac-12 North. All right. Wow, you ranked Oregon State pretty low. Yeah, they were easy to rank low, and hey, maybe they win a game in the Pac-12. As I mentioned, they've got Colorado on the road. If they would have had that game at home, I may have pulled the trigger on a Oregon State win in the Pac-12. They also have, I believe, Cal at home. Those seem to be their best shots to win a game. Jamie says Arizona State will be better than everybody thinks. And, you know, I said this during my video. I expect them to lose a lot of close games because the personnel is not horrible. They have one of the best players in the conference in N'Keal Harry, who caught 82 passes last year. Frank Darby could be an explosive player for them. He only caught 9 passes last year, but 3 against San Diego State for $111 and 2 touchdowns. They need to get him into the offense a little bit more. And Kyle Darby is a really good slot receiver. Kyle Williams, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up names. Kyle Williams out of the slot for Arizona State with 66 catches last year. Returning, reliable starting quarterback in Manny Wilkins, who threw 20 touchdowns against only 8 interceptions, and really only piled up bad numbers when he had to sling it all over the field. 3 picks against North Carolina State when ASU was overmatched in the Sun Bowl. So, yes, they've got the quarterback. They've got explosive wide receivers. They've got no experience coming back at running back. They've got an offensive line that's okay, and it returns a lot of experience. The defense has, it's similar to Oregon, but not as talented. 3 or 4 explosive guys, and then they are really scrambling on defense. And they were awful, except for 2 games last year, inexplicably against Washington in that game that derailed Washington's college football playoff hopes. and the game that they played against Utah, giving up 10 points. Other than that, Arizona State was awful on defense. So I'm not sold on Herm Edwards taking over this team, and I'm not sold on him making an immediate positive impact. And I don't mean that from a standpoint of his professionalism and his attitude and his leadership, because all of that's exceptional. Herm Edwards is a great guy, and he's a leader, and he's an inspirational leader, and he's a leader of young men. And anyone would want their son to play for Herm Edwards. Can he handle this situation? Maybe long-term he can. Maybe in 3 or 4 years. I just think it's going to be a rough go for Arizona State in season 1. And when I went through the schedule, it was difficult for me to find wins for Arizona State. All right, LSU superfan on board. I know Navy Thomas 8. If I had a complete operation, was doing this full time, and I had a little bit of help, I would take all that breaking news and see what happens, guys, with breaking news and why I don't jump on it more often. So there's breaking news that's confirmed, and there's breaking news that's rumor. And for me to dive into legal matters all the time and situations that involve a ton of investigation to really understand, to form an opinion. So I'm not going to be the guy to break the news. Nobody online breaks news unless they were there, or unless they have some kind of inside situation where they have a friend or a colleague that's involved. So we respond to the news, we react and give our opinion. So if Purdue starts 0-7 and fires Jeff Brom, of course I'm going to have something to say, because I've got the results of the games. I watched some of them. I have a knowledge of Purdue football, and I can make an opinion on, hey, this was the right thing to do. It's coming off the rails, or maybe there's some off-field conduct involved, or this is crazy. They're overreacting. Jeff Brom's a solid coach. He had this thing in the right direction. They lost 4 one-score games. This is stupid. I can make an opinion on confirmed football activity that's breaking news. And I should do that more, and I try to do that as much as possible. If there's a player who gets hurt, the impact of the injury on the team. If, God forbid, Justin Herbert gets hurt in practice tomorrow, I would jump on and give you my analysis. I would do some research on the backup quarterbacks and set that up for you. And, of course, always invite your engagement and opinion. But when it comes to rumors and situations that are highly involved with the NCAA or police, I'm not going to give my opinion if I don't feel very, very substantiated in my opinion. Jameis Winston, one of those times he came off the rails and did something stupid. I was headed to lunch with a friend, and I was finishing up a live stream with someone. And, you know, this is back in 2014. And I see on my phone that Jameis Winston is blowing up all over the place. This is the time that in the student commissary, he jumped on the table and spewed a bunch of obscenities and so forth. Well, I thought, this is going to blow up. I've got to say something about this. But I wanted to take at least 5 or 10 minutes, and still I didn't feel fully informed. But I knew that that was the last chance and the best chance for me to make a statement to gain some exposure and some following. So I did that, but even in that instance, didn't feel 100% confident that I understood, because the thing I don't want to do is to make a derogatory comment or share an opinion on somebody where I don't have the complete picture. So that's why I put some conditions on some of my thoughts sometimes in my perspective to say, I am stating, if this is true, then this is my opinion. But we don't have all the facts. We can't come to this conclusion right now. Therefore, I'm reserving judgment, because I believe in innocent until proven guilty. But if this is true, so let's make the assumption for the argument's sake, this is my conclusion on this individual and what should be done. All right. LSU, I just happened to be rewatching the 71-72 Orange Bowl. Yes, Burt Jones. Yes, Burt Jones I believe was the #1 pick in the NFL draft that year. If not #1, #2. That was right around that time all those quarterbacks were flying off the draft board at 1 and 2. Terry Bradshaw, Archie Manning were 1 and 2. Burt Jones, Jim Plunkett might have been in the same draft after he beat Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. All right. Drake Davis got arrested this morning. Kid, I'm pretty sure Mark should have a TV show and still do YouTube late night. Man, I hear those comments all the time, Kid, and I appreciate it. And we're doing what we can. All right. KABYAYAA. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. This is the first time I've seen you on one of our live chats. So welcome to Mark Rogers TV. And why do I think Utah is going to be so good? I should probably have my notes with me when I tell you this, because this was a difficult decision for me to bank Utah over USC. And I stayed in the video. Please go back and watch the Utah video, because that's where I make my case. I'm really swimming upstream here. USC has a more talented roster than Utah. USC has an easier schedule. They don't have to play Washington. Utah has the most difficult schedule in the Pac-12. In conference, if you look at my schedule rankings, I don't have them ranked tops in the Pac-12 because the non-conference is factored in. I believe I've got UCLA, then Arizona State as having the most difficult schedules in the Pac-12, all games included, because Oklahoma has to play, or UCLA has to play Oklahoma, and Fresno State and Cincinnati, and Arizona State plays Michigan State, most notably, and also San Diego State, and Utah doesn't play anyone. But that doesn't factor into the conference race. So they have the most difficult in-conference schedule because they have to play Washington, Stanford, and Oregon, all from the other division. So out of the contenders, they have the most difficult schedule. It's crazy to me, and it's wrong for Utah to have to play both Washington, Stanford, and Oregon, all three of those teams. Arizona does not play Washington or Stanford. Arizona, this is your year. Go for it. Kevin Sumlin, have you looked at your schedule? The teams that you play in the North Division went 12-24 last year. You need to make a move right now because it's the rotation's not going to be so kind next time around. So I'm swimming upstream with my Utah pick. I understand that. They are not as talented as USC. They have to go on the road to play Arizona, and they have to play all the difficult teams in the Pac-12 North. And this is why I weighted down the records. I initially was at 7-2 and 7-2 for those two. So I explained in the Utah video, whoever this is, KABYAYWAYAA, why I pick Utah. Experienced quarterback, one of the best running backs in the Pac-12, an experienced wide receiver core, though not explosive. That concerns me. They get retained Covey back after a 2-year LDS. He caught 43 passes for over 500 yards in 2015. The entire offensive line's back. The defense is always good. Top 40 S&P plus 11 consecutive years. The defensive backfield, along with Oregon and USC and Washington, those are the top defensive backs groupings in the Pac-12. I'm just, it's more of a hunch than anything. And again, I'm going up against the schedule. So my theory on Utah is two things have to happen. They play USC at home. So they've got head-to-head at home USC. So they have to win that game. Otherwise, they're buried by 2 games, and they would have to exceed USC by a game to win it outright and go to the championship game. So they have to beat USC at home. If we get to a point in the season, and it's in late October, I believe, the USC at Utah game, if the Trojans go in there and win, my deal's shot. I'm done. I am done. Unless that game's just a complete aberration and otherwise Utah wins every other game and USC's average. That's not going to happen. Utah has to beat USC at home. They have to basically, well, with my 6-3, this may come true, but it would help them greatly against Washington and Stanford to split those two. They do have the Huskies at home, but they've got to go to Stanford. This also causes me concern because Washington, I believe, is the best team in the conference. For Utah to host the best team, most likely lose to Washington, and then have to go to Stanford on the road and win, that's a difficult scenario. But they've got to win one of those two and beat USC at home. All right, Jamie, Tate is good, but fast teams can shut him down. So Khalil Tate, the interesting trend on him is, of course, the last 3 games of 2017 in which after just tearing 6 consecutive opponents' defenses to shreds for over 1,200 yards in 6 games and 11 touchdowns. We're not talking about great defenses here. We're not talking Alabama Clemson defense. Oregon, Arizona State, and Purdue shut him down to some combination of 28, 32, and 58 yards rushing. But he threw the ball really well those last 3 games, especially against Purdue, 302 yards, 5 touchdowns. And I watched the bowl game start to finish. Khalil Tate, I also saw him play USC start to finish. Other than that, I'm trying to think when I really watched him play. Mostly highlights, but those are the 2 games I watched start to finish. And he's impressive. He's not a bad passing quarterback. That's typically the perception. Oh, this guy's this explosive as a runner. He must be a scattershot thrower. That's not the case. He's not an advanced, polished passer, but he's good. He's accurate. He's got strong enough arm. No question. Okay, yes, we've got a witch hunt in the Big Ten concerning Ohio State in particular. What else do you guys have for me? Clemson Alum 98, good point on finding wins. It's one thing to say Team X will win more. It's another to go through their schedule and find the wins. It's almost like on Selection Sunday in the NCAA tournament, when you hear a bunch of guys say, they got ripped off, they got ripped off, they got ripped off, they should have been in, they should have been in, they should have been in. Okay, well, if you put all them in, who gets left out? And most of us, I think, have a tendency when we look at teams to project a bunch of wins. So if without thinking of the math, you just went through any conference and started saying, oh, what's their conference record going to be? What are they going to finish in the conference? You mostly would add this up to be a plus 500 record. And then you have to go back and think, uh-oh, these have to be even. Because I think the natural inclination is to think the records are going to be better. Like, I have an issue with Arizona State finishing 2-7 in the conference. And UCLA only 4-5. Their schedule is very difficult. And I believe Oregon State could pull out a win. And I really wanted Cal to be 4-5. But once I start doing that, and I really think between Utah and USC, one of them should break out to 7-2, and most likely it would be USC. But once I start doing that, I'm like 5 wins too many. And actually, I'm like 10 wins too many. But as soon as you knock off the 5 wins, you add the 5 losses. So that's what makes it very difficult. Is, if I just went through the Pac-12 schedule and said, boom, 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 these are the records I think, I would have about 5 or 6 too many wins. Because I really like Cal to go 4-5. I really think Oregon State's going to win 1 game. Again, UCLA could win 5. Arizona State and Colorado may bump up to another win or 2. In Arizona State's case, I wouldn't be shocked if they went 4-5 in the Pac-12. If they went 5-4, I would think that that's really overachieving for them. And again, USC's schedule is not that difficult. They don't have to deal with Washington. They do have Stanford on the road. So this is what I'm thinking with USC. Stanford in September, with most likely JT Daniels still breaking in. Stanford on the road in September. And again, that's deciding the division. And if I'm going to go with my pick, USC has to lose at Utah. So that's 2 losses. Then I think in the other 7 conference games, they trip up. They've got a date at Arizona. They've got UCLA on the road. Maybe they trip up one other time. That's your 3 losses for USC. But to just glance at the schedule, my first thought was USC is going 7-2. You're right. Oh, talking to Jamie there. I'll not dive into back and forth conversations here. Who's starting at quarterback for UCLA? That is a great call. I don't know what the last out of Chip Kelly's mouth has been. I don't know that he has not decided a quarterback. If you follow us here on a regular basis, you know that Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football, who is a UCLA guy through and through, and even though he doesn't have an official UCLA situation professionally as a beat writer, I trust him as much as anyone because he's been in the area and has so many connections to the UCLA inner circle that he's my guy to go to. I have not talked to Tony recently about the quarterback situation, but we've lined it up a number of times with Wilton Spate and Matt Lynch. And, of course, Dorian Thompson-Robinson coming in, the guy that all UCLA fans eventually want to see as the starting quarterback. I lined that up in the video. Spade is the most accomplished, the most experienced, the most trustworthy, but the fit with the Chip Kelly offense seems like a big stretch to me. Chip Kelly is going to have to just completely overhaul his thinking of what he wants to see out of his offense if he chooses Wilton Spate. Not that the guy is completely running in quicksand, but it's not pretty. He's not a Chip Kelly quarterback. Of course, Devin Monster finished last season, and he would probably be the safe pick because he's mobile. He's not fast or elusive. He's not in that realm, but he's mobile. He can run. He can threaten a defense. He can't be left alone. He can make some plays with his feet. So Devin Monster is the guy who played well the first half of the bowl game. They kind of clamped him down in the second half against Kansas State and played really well in the game that pushed UCLA to 6 wins and to a bowl berth against Cal. He went 18 for 21 in that game. So you got Monster, Spate, Lynch, and then the wild card is, of course, the true freshman, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Utah sucks. Washington, Arizona, Pac-12 championship game according to West End 04. Emmanuel, if JT is as good as advertised, his performance in camp has been great. The Trojans should have a great chance to go 11-1. SC's defense is legit. Running game looks on point. Can't wait to see how it goes. I would not be shocked if USC went 11-1. Most likely the loss would be Notre Dame late in the season or Stanford early in the season. I also think that USC is going to go to, I got 8-4 there for USC. I just jotted this down as right before I jumped on. I've got USC losing one of the 2, Texas, Notre Dame. Most likely, I'm thinking breaking in JT Daniels. They lose at Texas and Austin, and they lose that game against Texas early in the season. And they, even though I like Notre Dame as a better team right this second, the better team doesn't always win the games. I've pounded that home in recent years in a number of these predictions that the better team doesn't always win. Clemson lost to Pitt. Clemson lost to Syracuse. That late in the season, last game of the season, at the Coliseum, USC beats Notre Dame. That's possibly going to derail a Notre Dame college football playoff appearance because I think Notre Dame's that good. Which conference next? So we've got the Big 12. I just cut Kansas just started Kansas. Crazy upsets or trap games. There are so many great topics that we could attack that are more mid-off season. I did list Cab YAA. I did list my top 10 dark horses, and I also reviewed the first 3 weeks of the season and talked about my top games, top 10 non-conference games for 2018, if you want to look that up on the channel. And also, I ran down weeks 1, 2, and 3 in non-conference play and talked about my under-the-radar games that could be interesting. Okay, crazy upsets or trap games. Crazy upset possibilities. I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I don't know where these games are played. I don't know what you would consider a trap game, or we know what a trap game is. It's obviously before or after a huge game for an opponent. But in terms of road versus home, I don't have those off the top of my head. What I'm thinking is Washington going to Utah. That's a possible big upset. Washington at Utah. Then we've got Washington has to travel to Oregon. Oregon gets both Stanford and Washington at home, and that's one of the reasons why this is a precarious 7-2, because I'm thinking that Oregon's going to win one of those two home games against Washington or Stanford, and then they lose to somebody else along the way. They've got USC on the road. They probably lose that game, and that's their 7-2. Could Oregon go 4-5? Absolutely, they could, especially with injuries. You know, USC obviously went to Washington State early last season, and they lost that game on a Friday night. So that's what you're talking about, those kind of games. I think anybody going to Arizona is a difficult matchup, and I believe Washington has a trip to no, they don't. Arizona doesn't play Washington. So it's difficult for me to go through those trap games and possible big upsets, like crazy upsets. Again, crazy upsets. What have we had recently? Iowa State, Oklahoma. I mentioned the two Clemson upsets the last 2 years, losing to Pitt and Syracuse. Those are inexplicable. Huge upsets the last couple seasons. Who am I missing? Kansas beat Texas, of course, 4 or 5 years ago. Well, that's only been a few years ago. But Texas wasn't even that good. Troy beat LSU. Jacksonville State almost beat Auburn. Georgia Southern beat Florida. Crazy in-conference upsets. Remember, Indiana beat Missouri, the Missouri team that went 7-1 in the SEC and went to the championship game. So anyway, sorry I don't have a real good read on the upset games because I don't have the schedule in front of me. But I could certainly, well, with 56 teams to go, I don't know that I'm going to get to that. But, you know, I mentioned preseason. What I did last season is what a lot of guys do, and that's run through every game. So I'd throw a team up there, Arizona State, I'd go through every game, and I would predict the winner and the loser of the game. And I also included a win probability factor because I wanted to make it clear that while, for example, last year, believe it or not, go back and check the video, I predicted Pitt to beat Miami preseason. And, of course, you can imagine the backlash that I took after predicting Pitt to beat Miami preseason. And I was making it very clear. I gave Pitt like a 20% chance of winning that game, and people couldn't put those two together. You're giving Pitt a 20% chance to win that game against Miami, but you're predicting them to win. Yes, the best team doesn't always win. So there are going to be a couple dozen upsets this season in college football in which you would clearly come away from this game and say, if these two teams played again, the team that lost would almost definitely win. If Clemson and Syracuse played another 10 times, most of us would say Clemson's going to win all those games and most likely win 9 of them for sure. But on that Friday night at Syracuse, they lost. So if I would have had the vision to say, you know what, I can just envision Friday night trap game, Clemson at Syracuse. Clemson's going to play out of its mind like it did the year before against Virginia Tech. Syracuse is going to win that game against Clemson, and everybody would have went, oh, you're crazy. Somewhat, but those games are going to happen. Even if I would have still put on the board that Syracuse has a 5 or 10% chance of beating Clemson, people would have said, what are you talking about? You don't make any sense. The best team doesn't always win. They win 85 or 90% of the time. But if you're truly going to make predictions, it's easy to get up here and go through the power index. And this is what I see at times online, is that basically people at the end of their predictions, they say Ohio State's going to go 11-1. And then they look at other power index and say Ohio State's going to go 11-1. And this is pretty much how every team results come out, and they say, well, I must know what I'm talking about because I'm right there with the power index. Well, we all know who the favorites are, and the favorites projected even now in November. But to make true predictions, you've got to go out on a limb somewhere. Because if you're truly making predictions, if you're just going to say who the favorites are in each and every game, and that's going to be your prediction for everything, then what good is the prediction? It's not really a prediction. It's just a regurgitation of the favorites. You have to try to find where is that aberration in that conference this year? Where is it going to happen? And we'll see. And yes, is chalk going to prevail most of the time? Absolutely. Is it going to prevail, especially this year in the SEC and the ACC? Probably. All right. Washington's best shot for a Pac-12 title since the 90s. Alpha male, you do realize that Washington won the Pac-12 2 years ago, 2016. If Mark is correct and USC has 3 conference losses and split with Texas and Notre Dame, 4 losses would be disappointing. Yes, it would be. UCLA going to suck, according to Cash Boy D. So I think that's UCLA and Utah. Yeah, I expect UCLA to take off. And I point this out in the video. It's going to be fascinating to see whether Chip Kelly is the Chip Kelly impact of the Oregon years, or he just becomes another head coach that runs the spread. It's going to be fascinating. Is he going to be able to transition and transform his offense with more ingenuity and creativity to stay ahead of defenses, to stay ahead of the wave, or is he going to pull back and become just another guy who's very adept at running that offense, who knows it, but the defenses have caught up, and that's the way it is in college football? Is that going to be the case with Chip Kelly? If you checked out my UCLA video, I likened Chip Kelly to Steve Spurrier. In the mid-90s, Steve Spurrier was running an offense that nobody could contain, and yes, maybe Thomas 8. I know that Nebraska shut them down in the 95 championship game, 62-24. So almost nobody was able to contain Florida's offense as they ran off how many SEC championships they won in 93, 94, 95, 96. And they had that string those years. And then 97, actually, Tennessee broke through. But they won 5 consecutive SEC championships, and it was arguably the best conference. And the thought around college football is nobody knows how to stop this offense. So the fun and gun was ahead of its time, and Steve Spurrier was lauded for it, and rightfully so. Well, by the time Steve Spurrier went to the Washington Redskins and then came back and coached South Carolina, his offense was pretty marginal for a long time. Check out South Carolina's numbers between the time Steve Spurrier took over, I believe, in 2003, for about 8 or 9 years. South Carolina was churning out 7-5 seasons. Now, near the end of his run, he became a complete head coach who recruited extremely well, who ran the offense still, but he brought in some fresh blood to help him run the offense, really stacked up on defense, brought in defensive coaching personnel that was first rate, and he won 11 games 3 consecutive years. He somewhat reinvented himself. Chip Kelly is going to have to follow the Steve Spurrier model. Alpha male, UCLA's schedule is brutal. Chip will bring them back, but it will take a few years. What I find very intriguing about the UCLA roster is I looked at Oregon's 2013 roster. So this is the season before Mark Helfrich took them to the national championship game. This is Chip Kelly's final Oregon team that I believe beat 2013. Which year was that? Anyway, they finished in the top 5 in the country. I believe that was the team that 2013, they barely missed the BCS championship game. Probably had one of those losses to Stanford that derailed the season. I believe that was the team that beat Kansas State in the Cotton Bowl. Anyway, really good Oregon team that went 11-1. He went 33-3 in conference play. He dominated for those years at Oregon, 46-7. So I looked at the recruiting classes, according to 247 Sports, that made up that final roster for Chip Kelly at Oregon in 2013. And those 4 recruiting cycles going into a 5th because of red shirts ranked between 12th and 18th in the country, between 2nd and 4th in the Pac-12. Those 4 or 5 recruiting classes. If you look at UCLA's last 4 or 5 recruiting classes, they are almost identical to Oregon's. They are all ranked between 2nd and 4th in the Pac-12 and between 12th and 18th in the country. I just find it fascinating that Chip Kelly is basically dealing with the same level of talent here at UCLA, even just walking on campus, that he had at Oregon and won at that level. That's how effective he was at talent development and at scheming an offense versus a defense. And finding players that fit his scheme. So, of course, he was recruiting all that talent at Oregon to fit his scheme versus just inheriting talent that is comparable but may not fit his style or was not handpicked by him. So I understand the difference, but it just fascinates me that basically he has comparable talent on this UCLA roster than what he had in going 11-12-1 at Oregon. Leon, can't wait to see Scott Frost turn Nebraska around. Yeah, I had UCLA on the Dark Horse video. I did. Yeah, I have that level of respect for Chip Kelly. Nebraska's schedule is brutal as well. I had Nebraska on the Dark Horse schedule, I believe, as well, and their schedule does not work in my favor. So one of the reasons I put Oregon at the top of the Dark Horse video was because of what we just talked about. Even though they play against 2 very good teams in their division and have to go to USC, the non-conference, which is going to puff up the schedule for the college football playoff. Perception, maybe the committee itself won't be fooled by Oregon's 3 out-of-conference games that are lousy, but in terms of perception, you know, let's say Oregon starts 3-2 in the Pac-12, but they've got the other 3 wins, so they're 6-2 at that point in the season, or 7-1. So it's going to look really good record-wise because they play the 3 cupcakes non-conference. So that was one of the reasons why I made Oregon a dark horse. It had to do with Justin Herbert. It had to do with defensive personnel and explosive players on both sides of the ball, and it had to do with schedule out of conference that is going to give them the 3 automatic wins to tack on to the Pac-12 record. Iowa crushing Ohio State. Okay, so I'm catching up, William, with the conversation from a few minutes ago about upsets that we didn't see coming. It would not have shocked me if somebody would have told me the day before the Ohio State-Iowa game that Iowa was going to win this game 20-17 on a last-second field goal. I said, sure. Kinnick Stadium, difficult place to play. Iowa, very resourceful. Kirk Ferentz has seen it, done it all. And we saw just a few weeks earlier against a comparable Penn State team, Iowa played with Penn State statistically dominating. Iowa played a near perfect game from the standpoint of not making mistakes and making big plays when they needed it. And their defensive front was just awesome in that game. And so I thought, okay, this is the blueprint against Ohio State. And, of course, Penn State, Trace McSorley had to make a last-minute drive, and the Juwan Johnson touchdown pass with like 2 seconds left averted the upset. Otherwise, Iowa plays a perfect game, and they would have won 19-14. I think they lost 21-19. So that scenario I could have seen, but 55-31, nobody saw that coming. Arizona State will beat UW. Book it. Can we drop the Syracuse Pitt stuff? Clemson alum 98. It all worked out. It all worked out. Alabama lost to Ole Miss 2 consecutive years. They lost to Johnny Manziel, and everybody brings up that game as being huge and so impactful. The Johnny Manziel versus Alabama game. It didn't matter. Alabama still made it to the national championship game and won. So they weren't an undefeated national champion. They were the national champion in 2012. Same for Clemson. That did not keep them from the college football playoff and to make it to the championship game one of those 2 years. Still got their goals accomplished, still won the ACC. Yeah, a bit embarrassing, especially losing to Syracuse. Pitt was not bad that year. They were 8-5. They beat Penn State. Okay. Mark, as an Ohio State fan, has amnesia of the Iowa game. Did it sound like I've got amnesia? Mark thinks Utah will win the Pac-12 South. Yeah, Richard? There's got to be a change-up somewhere in college football. Otherwise, Washington wins the Pac-12. Oklahoma wins the Big 12. Alabama and Georgia play in the SEC championship game. Clemson beats Miami in the ACC championship game. And Ohio State beats Wisconsin in the Big 10 championship game. And, man, wake me up in December, the first week for the championship games, and this is all chalk. I hate to see that that's what it's going to be, and it could be that. It could be that simple and cut and dry, but, man, we've been looking forward to college football for 9 months, and I would hate to think we all already know exactly what's going to happen before anybody plays a game. Clemson alum 98. Nebraska needs to build around the elite talent available to them in the farm country. Big, strong offensive linemen, tight end bodies, then try to pluck athletes from around the country, but they have it upside down. Okay, you guys talking some Nebraska football, quarterbacks. Navy Thomas likes Martinez. He's got definitely the most upside, the least experience. So we've got Alpha Male saying that the Huskers will have a top 10 program by year 3 by 2020. Nebraska is going to be a top 10 team. Haven't finished the Pac-12 or Big 10 yet, but so far my big upsets are Georgia Tech over Miami, okay? Texas Tech over Oklahoma. I can see it, Buckeye State Sports. USC has all the talent to win the Pac-12. Not sure, though, about the quarterback selection. Offensive line, play calling, and coaching system in general is a big question mark. Mohammed chiming in. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I want to remind everyone to send in your email and your name to MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and I'll put you on the mailing list. That starts week 1 of the college football season. Would love to have you on board. Okay, anything else here? I actually felt sorry for Florida during the game. No team in the modern era matched up to the 95 Huskers. Jamie, I think clarifying the Oregon game I was trying to come up with, and I did correctly get that K-State in the Fiesta Bowl. Like a 38-20 game, something like that, with Colin Klein at quarterback. Alpha Male just subscribed to Navy Thomas. Navy Thomas. Very nice. All right, all right, all right. Don't see anything else here. If Washington beats Auburn, they must find a way to run the ball to open up for deep passes. And as you can see on my board, I've got Auburn defeating Washington. It's a toss-up to me. It's a toss-up. Will I be surprised if Washington wins? Of course not. Washington's probably slightly better than Auburn. The game in Atlanta is swaying me. I say Auburn finally wins a game in that stadium. They've lost, well, I guess it's just been the 2 straight games in that stadium. (28-80-28) per usual. Things will happen to upset the chalk. Only Alabama has been a lock in the playoff era, and they almost didn't get in last year. The year that Alabama almost didn't get in was really 2015. Does that mean anything to you guys? So in 2015, Alabama lost to Ole Miss. Ole Miss controlled the division. Ole Miss was in great shape to win the division. They still had some fairly difficult games. Arkansas was decent, Mississippi State. But the game, I don't know where it was played, because I can't picture the uniforms. I think it was played at Ole Miss. Overtime, tie game, of course. Or maybe Ole Miss kicked a field goal to take the lead. Anyway, Arkansas had the ball. They had the ball last, overtime. Do you guys remember this play? It's one of the craziest plays I've ever seen. The Hunter Henry catch, and he's being flung out of bounds, and it's 4th and 25, so he knows I can't allow myself to be flung out of bounds and to step out of bounds because the game will be over. So I have to do what is normally the most idiotic thing to do, and that's throw the ball over his head. And he chucked it back about 15 yards, and it went into a mass of players, and Alex Collins ripped it out of there and ran for a first down. And I possibly could have been the touchdown, but at least a first down. And Arkansas knocked off Ole Miss to move into the championship game. To deny Ole Miss of the SEC championship game and give them a second loss in conference play. And that was a really good Ole Miss team, 2015. That was the team that went to the Sugar Bowl and tore apart Oklahoma State. And that sent Alabama to Atlanta. Otherwise, Alabama doesn't make the championship game against Clemson that year, does not win the national championship, doesn't get to the college football playoff, doesn't get to the SEC championship game. So if you're going to lose a game, you need luck or need the right breaks elsewhere. Jamie says Clemson's the only lock to win their conference, and I certainly am on board with everyone else in stating that Clemson is the biggest lock by far of anyone. I do want to caution everyone of making too much of what we saw at the ACC championship game last year. I know it was bad. I know that Clemson proved to be far superior. But even if those two teams would have played the next day or the next week, Clemson's now winning that game 38-3. They didn't beat North Carolina State and Louisville and Florida State and all those teams that bad that weren't as good as Miami. That game was an aberration. Yes, it showed that Clemson was dominant on that night, decidedly the better team, but I'm estimating more like a 2-touchdown better team, not a 35-point, 5-touchdown better team. So don't expect a 38-3 result in the ACC championship game this year. Does anybody miss the old elegance of the bowl games? pre-BCS besides me. All Navy. Subject for another time. Muhammad again, welcome to Mark Rogers TV. And I believe we've expired the live chat. I think I've hit most of the decent comments here and the meaningful stuff. So I appreciate you guys joining in. Again, this is the culmination of the Pac-12 season this year, according to Mark Rogers TV. It's Washington, Oregon, and Stanford gunning for the Pac-12 North Division. It's Washington with a loss at some point along the line, and that's probably at Utah or at Oregon. They will split those two games to finish 8-1. Oregon and Stanford 7-2, 7-2. This doesn't necessarily mean that Oregon beats Stanford. I only put them on top of those two because of the better overall record, because Oregon plays nobody. Stanford plays San Diego State and Notre Dame. So for two teams in the same conference, or even within the entire Power Five, to take one team that plays nobody and to take teams like USC, who plays Notre Dame and Texas, or Pitt, who plays Notre Dame and Penn State, it's just crazy to me. In South Florida, I think I've got it. Maybe not necessarily Pitt. It's not Pitt. Anyway, a number of teams in the Power Five play two tough games, and then some don't play any, like Washington State and Oregon. That can't happen. So I've got Oregon on top just because of the overall record. They do play Stanford at home. That may be the tiebreaker as well. I know a lot of people like Stanford to win the conference. That would not surprise me. I think that there are 5 teams that can win the conference. Let's put it that way. I would be stunned if Arizona won the Pac-12 championship. But I guess I wouldn't be that shocked if they won the South. Therefore, that puts them into a one-game scenario with anyone, and anything can happen there. So I guess I could stretch it to 6. But basically, I think that there are 5 teams in the running for the Pac-12 championship. And that's, of course, Washington, Oregon, and Stanford. It's Utah and USC. Washington State, I think, is going to take the biggest decline of anyone, not necessarily just record-wise, going from 9-3 to 6-6, because we also see Arizona State going from 7-5 to 4-8. But just in terms of level of play, that Washington State is going to take a hit this year. And again, I say Arizona State, but I am putting a disclaimer on the 4-8, 2-7 for Arizona State, that I think close losses. They don't play that poorly. They have a reliable quarterback, a game changer at N'Keal Harry at wide receiver. They've got really good players on the team, especially on offense. But I don't see the wins. So Cal, I see, is much improved, although the record doesn't show it there. But they get to postseason play after winning just 5 games last year. So here are your bowl-eligible teams: Washington, Oregon, Stanford, Washington State, and Cal. And then, again, Utah, they've got a narrow path. So I understand I'm picking the more difficult entry to the Pac-12 championship game here. USC is the safe and easy pick. They have more talent than Utah. They have an easier schedule. I understand that. I'm just going to change it up with Utah. I've got a hunch here, and Utah has to beat USC at home. USC could lose at Utah and still win the Pac-12 South. And again, of course, I'm saying Utah has to win that game. Technically, they don't have to win it. Mathematically, they don't have to win it. But it's difficult to conceive a scenario in which Utah loses to USC and still plays 2 games better for the rest of the Pac-12 schedule to win the division. Utah has to beat USC. So I'm banking on Utah wins at home against USC, and they split with Washington, Oregon, or Washington, Stanford. They also have to deal with Oregon, so they've got to win most likely 2 of those 3, and they lose to somebody else. But I've got a log jam here at 6-3, 6-3, 5-4. Arizona is helped out by having the easiest schedule in the Pac-12. No Stanford, no Washington. UCLA is intriguing to me. Probably the 2 most intriguing teams to me are Oregon and UCLA because of personnel, because of coaching changes, and because of schedule. UCLA is an interesting case. Arizona State, I see them taking a tumble, as I've mentioned. I understand quarterback's back, best players back, and the schedule's not daunting, but I'm not finding the wins for Arizona State. I think they lose a lot of close games. In Colorado, whatever happened in 2016, I don't know that it really happened. I think we dreamed of that, 10 wins, because they were awful before, they're awful after. They've lost everything on offense, excluding Steven Montez at quarterback. The cupboard is bare on offense, and I can't imagine that they've recruited that well or will be developing players that well on offense through their fall camp to get them ready for Pac-12 play and to win games in the Pac-12. So 2-7 might be generous. My original 1-8 and 7-2 for one of the top two teams, probably more like it. But I'm feeling generous for Colorado, and they do have Oregon State at home. So there's one win, almost for sure, almost for sure. And Colorado, if you look at the defense, their better players on defense are the incoming classes. So they're probably not going to be ready. They could be improved considerably on defense in 2019. So that's my take, and I really wanted to say, hey, we're going to see some enormous upset in the Pac-12 championship game, and Utah's going to come in. And we could all cite a number of conference championship game upsets. The most famous might be the Texas win over Nebraska in 1996 to take Nebraska out of the Pac-12, out of the BCS championship game, or what was at the time before the BCS, the Coalition championship game, and Navy Thomas 8 doesn't want me to bring that up. But I've got to go with the more explosive team, the better talent. That Utah's just going to have trouble scoring against Washington. That is just going to be a struggle. It's going to be a competitive game, a decent game, a game that you're still watching with 10 minutes left thinking, okay, Washington should win this game, but they're only up 24-13 or 21-17. And so it's still a game, but Washington's better, and they will close it out with a late touchdown to win over Utah 31-20 to possibly, we'll have to see what happens in the other conferences, possibly get to the college football playoff at what would be then 11-2. Okay, everyone. I think I'm about to wrap things up unless you guys have anything else on the line, because I've got to get to work on the Big 12. The Big 12 is coming up. Please check out the videos on the Pac-12 and the schedule rankings and the conversations we have with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. Our most recent conversation was James Yoder from Chat Sports talking Michigan on Thursday night. We have David Waters from Gators Breakdown coming up on a live stream Sunday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. Yes, as you can see, I'm doing less live streams with bloggers and broadcasters and writers in the recent weeks because I'm focusing on the previews and predictions. And we'll get you set up to opening night on 2018 on Thursday night. Northwestern, Purdue headlines. Anything else? Mailing list. Join the mailing list. Send your email and your name to MarkRogersTV at Gmail, and we will have a fun time with the mailing list. And will not abuse your email address in any such way. I'm an honest and trustworthy individual. And you will have my email as well. It's out there for everyone to find me. MarkRogersTV at Gmail. That's where you can find me. All right, everyone. I'm going to work on the Big 12. I don't know when my next live stream will be, but it will, at the latest, be 5 o'clock Eastern Time, Florida football, David Waters, Gators Breakdown, right here on MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. I will see all of you next time.